Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. In this podcast, Tim and I, PRI's Director of Communications, visited with Senate Housing Committee Vice Chair Mike Morrell. Senator Morrell and Tim discussed all things housing, including the prospects for free market housing reform legislation this session. We love this topic because every time we talk about housing, we get a lot of listeners. Senator Morrell and Tim also discussed the student safety legislation, other legislative priorities, and what he's doing that other Republicans might learn from as they work to turn around the party's fortunes. Thanks for listening.
Well, Senator Mike Morrell, thank you so much for joining us on Next Round with PRI.
Well, I am grateful that you're having me here on your show.
We're here in your office at the state capitol, and housing is once again at the top of the agenda in Sacramento this year. And we're so fortunate to have you on our podcast because you really do have a front row seat to all the housing reform legislation as vice chair of the Senate Housing Committee. This obviously is an issue that PRI has written extensively about. Our Kerry Jackson has written a lot about both housing and homelessness in California. And he's made the point that we're not really going to make a dent in our housing problem until the legislature finally enacts CEQA reform. Fortunately, you've introduced legislation to do just that, and that's Senate Bill 384. Talk about what your legislation would do and how, in your view, will it make a difference in cutting through this red tape that often seems to hold up badly needed housing projects around the state?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. The governor says that he wants housing. He sees the need that we have for housing. You know, we're short approximately 1.8 million homes in the next 5 years. And I hope he's sincere about it. And so what I did is we created a bill to give him exactly what he wants. Now, I have to be honest with you, I'm a little bit skeptical because, you know, he's been a pretty progressive government, which is right there on the line of socialism. And I noticed when his speech that he gave, the State of the State, just last week, he talked about, on one hand, he wanted to get rid of the high-speed rail, but then on the other hand, he says, well, we're going to finish it from Merced to Bakersfield, then we'll take a look in other areas, and we don't want to let the federal money go. So, you know, he put it on the table, then he took it off again. And, you know, I'm always worried about doublespeak like that. But on this housing thing, he seems sincere, but I guess we'll have to see what his intentions are because we are very short on housing. A couple of things that I'm very concerned about. There's a book, the title of it is How Money Walks, and it gives guidelines who's leaving the state, what companies are leaving, but our highly educated young professionals between 25 and 39 years of age are leaving for opportunities outside the state because they want more than jobs, they want careers. But another thing is housing become very, very expensive.
As you mentioned, Governor Newsom's opening salvo on housing, and it actually came a little bit before, a little bit after his State of the State when he decided to sue the city of Huntington Beach because they aren't approving, in his view, enough housing construction to meet the state's housing construction goals. And the administration also came out and put 47 other cities that aren't meeting these goals on notice that they too could face a lawsuit. So, you know, it seems like there's no doubt that NIMBYism and kind of these narrow local interests are getting in the way of housing construction, but kind of a conflict here, you know, between allowing local control, but yet cities may be holding up badly needed new housing. So where do you come down on this? Is Newsom right, or should cities be able to do what they want on housing, or maybe it's somewhere in between?
I like your answer. It's in between. First of all, getting back to the founding principles of limited government, when we talk about CEQA, a lot of people aren't sure exactly what that means. They shut down a lot of great projects, and the challenges are builders want to buy a piece of land here in California, and then once they get through ESCO, they start to build, and they run into these problems with the city as well as CEQA. And sometimes, you know, there's projects that take 2 to 3 years to get built. If you're lucky, in one case, in other cases, it's 6 to 10 years to get a tract of homes built. And so markets can change. There can be a recession, and, you know, these builders are investing a lot and they can lose their money. And then we have the fact that people want to buy homes. So these bureaucracy and making it painful for the builders, but more than that, we have a housing shortfall, and we want people, especially first-time home buyers, to be able to buy homes and have the same opportunities as my generation had. Or I should say I prefer local control, but you make a good point about some of these cities use that just to get more fees, and so they make it tough on builders. So there is a role that the state can play, but it should be a limited role. They've controlled the state enough, and remember, the problem is government. It always has been. We've got 5,000 to 6,000 years of recorded history. That never works. We see that happening in Venezuela right now, where few want to control everything. Our founders talked about limiting government's power. So I do prefer local control. But again, some of the cities, they have done things they shouldn't have done. And so I think state can play a role, but they want to limit. And I think where that role would come in, because I used to be in real estate, had a real estate company, in fact, and I used to be on the board of the Building Industry Association. And so I think the role that they can play is have the cities clearly lay out a couple of things, a schedule of their fees and costs so the builders can know right away. And then the second thing is sort of what would be the timeline for the approval process to get a home through. And in that way, a builder can go in there and say, you know what, this city's too expensive, I'm going to pass. They take too long, I'm going to pass. Or they'll be able to say, yeah, this city, I can do business here. And then once you have everything fully disclosed up front, then the builder can calculate, you know what, if I get this project done in a year and a half and I can build what I want to build based on clear criteria, when we have good communication, that can help cities too. So I think, again, state play a limited role. And the part that I would like to see them play is guidelines for the cities, for their schedules of fees and their timeline and approval process, and then what size housing and what would be the density that you can build there. I think between that and then getting the feds off our back, and especially CEQA reform, I think that would just open a way for a floodgate for housing. But then there's other problems too, which I'll discuss in a minute.
What does the effect of California's continually increasing housing costs have on our economy and on tax revenues? And where do you see our housing market and overall economy going in the next several years?
You know, that's a hard one. We have a recession claim every 10 years, so we're overdue for one. So I don't know. But I think there's some challenges here in the economy. I was reading one study, I think it was from UCLA, the Gary Anderson School of Business, I believe it was, says that if we were to be able to create these homes to fill that void or that need, it could create in the building industry 326,000 jobs. And the reason why is, let me give you an example. In 1963, California, with not even half the population we have now, listen to these numbers. 1963, half of the population, that year they built new housing, 302,000. Okay, you come up to just recently, 2016, and we've got double the people here in California. We barely eked out over 100,000 new building permits in California. And so, you know, we're down 2/3, yet the state has doubled. So that just tells you how much government's got in the way. And so that is a problem. But if we could add 326,000 jobs, that's incredible, because what happens is building jobs pay well, and then what happens is when you have people building homes, they need CPAs, they need car insurance, they need to buy new cars, they're going to buy groceries, they want to buy a home. Now you need more roofing materials. So what happens is these type of jobs usually create 2 or 3 other jobs. So it's very good and a healthy thing for our economy. But when it goes the other way, you know, that's one of the challenges you have, is why there's a lot of people leaving our state, not just the highly educated young professionals, but also middle and upper middle class are going to areas because people want careers, not jobs, but careers. And there's other states that are offering that. The top 500 CEOs in America, or some of the top 500 CEOs, I should say, 12 years in a row, and CEO Magazine has rated California the most difficult state to do business in. Ironically, though, it's the number one state they'd like to live in because we have so many great things here. But the problem isn't the state. Beautiful weather, 5 deep water seaports for trade. We've got the San Joaquin Valley, which produces about $48 billion a year in agriculture revenue. But the problem isn't that. We just have so much beauty here. The problem is government gets in the way. And remember, historically, as government expands, liberty contracts, and then soon we begin to lose our freedom as well as our prosperity. So that's what I see going on here. The more we place government in control, these unelected bureaucrats, you will see a downturn in our state's economy sooner than later. And that's not to mention, I'm on the CalPERS committee for people who get their pensions through government, and our governor told me last year that expect in the next few years a pension tsunami. So there's a lot of challenges at stake, and that's why we need to bring good jobs into our state and careers to be able to produce money for families to thrive. And then, of course, they pay taxes, and then you have more tax money to coming in to pay for roads and infrastructure and education.
Playing off what you said about the chief executive survey, PRI did a survey last year of business executives who left California. And we asked them the simple question, why? And yes, jobs and the economy and regulations were important. But number one, they said housing. And it wasn't housing for them, it was housing for their workers. And the second was education. And it wasn't so they could hire a good workforce. It was really a employee retention issue, that their employees would have good schools for their kids. And that kind of brings up another priority of yours this session, and that's student safety. You've been really one of the driving forces behind legislation. It's called the SAFE Act, and that's Senate Bill 709, that would ensure safe schools by keeping sexual predators out of the classroom and keeping kids safe by strengthening the disclosure and screening process. Now, that sounds like a no-brainer to me, but of course, the simplest and most common sense ideas become controversial in this building, and I know this proposal has run into some resistance in the past. So talk about your legislation and what it would do and how you rate your chances for your bill passing this session.
What this does is if there's been a person who has been caught or proven that they're a child molester, predator, before things get too bad, you'll have these people quit before they quit, and then they go on to another school district, and fearful perhaps of a lawsuit, the previous school district just passes this predator along without, giving full disclosure to the next school that you're hiring someone who is just downright evil, right? And so, as you say, it's a no-brainer, but the union's pretty big. The unions shut my bill down, and the Dems TD'd it last year. They turned it down, and I think they were afraid of the unions, just my personal opinion. But, anybody that I speak to who has children love this bill. We had a couple of women come up to Capitol who testified. They had been molested, and I think one girl teacher she was molested by had a number of people he had abused. But yeah, I couldn't believe, again, it's a common sense bill to protect our kids, but there's some of the unions up here have powerful interests, and so again, the Dems turned it down last year, which was amazing to me. But here's another thing: I've had some other bills in the past years just like this, where it's a good bill, it's going to protect our students. And the first year it didn't go, the second year it almost went, and then the third year it went. So I'm going to bring this up every year and hold those people's feet to the fire who vote against this. So I'm confident this bill will eventually go. Whether it be this year, that I'm not sure of, but we have to protect our kids first, and that's first and foremost.
You mentioned a little bit earlier California's new governor, Gavin Newsom, and your bill might be one of the things you want to take up with the new governor the next time you have to chat with him. Now, we know it's early yet. We're sitting here, less than 2 months into his governorship. But how have you found working with him different from working with his predecessor, Governor Brown? And do you see a couple of examples where, hey, you might be able to set aside party differences and work across party lines with him? And what do you see maybe some of the fault lines looming for him as he starts to work with the legislature and those inevitable clashes with the legislature come?
It's a little early to tell, so you want to hope the best. But again, when he gave his State of the State speech, he spoke in terms of giving and taking away, and about the high-speed rail, I'm against it, but then again, I'm for it. Healthcare, we have to give it to everyone we can. Then again, too, we've got to cut fees on healthcare. So I don't know how you give more and cut the fees. So, there's a lot of kind of double speak. He's got a rent control, right? Instead of calling it rent control, it's called rent stability. And so again, that's just the same old thing. I've been up here a little over 8 years, and I don't like when people change those words. It's clever. I love that the Dems do it that way. They're smart to sell it that way. Nobody wants control, but they do want stability. But it's the same thing. And so, that's an infringement when government controls property rights. And what happens in areas that you do have rent control on apartments, for an example, these landowners will have deferred maintenance. The property will start needing painting and things will start to fall apart. And when you're not producing an income or a profit on those apartments, you're not going to put money into them. So where you do have rent control quite often, you'll see the properties start to deteriorate. And then, of course, that seems to do bad for the neighborhood and brings in other types of problems. So government's not the answer typically, or the solution. They're usually the problem by creating things like this. And so I'm very suspicious, and I'm just normally a suspicious person. But looking at the governor's past track record in San Francisco and some of the things I've heard that is going on, they have some extreme challenges over there. That it's not the city, from what I understand, it used to be. And I know that just from the times I've been over there, it sure has changed in sort of a negative direction. And so again, I'm cautious, but then again too, I know it's my duty to give him a fair shake. And so that's why I introduced that bill on housing. He seems very sincere. His words, I couldn't find really too much wrong with the things he said about housing. So I'm hoping that he's sincere in this, and we'll find out right away, because I've got this bill, and I hope he gets behind it and pushes it, because it's everything he's asking for. So we'll see how he performs.
One of the biggest challenges you face these days, and you mentioned a little bit with your bill a minute ago, is trying to get your bills passed in a Senate where Republicans just have 11 out of 40 senators. So how do you move the ball forward on your personal legislative priorities and your district legislative priorities, given such a challenging political climate in Sacramento these days?
Well, that's a good question. It's not easy at all, because you have two competing ideologies. You have socialism building in the Democratic Party here in the capital here in Sacramento, and then of course you have the free markets and believe in individual responsibility and limiting government's power, and the citizens should be the ones to sort of control what goes on, and they should be the driver and government should be the car. We tell the car which way to go. And so you have two political ideologies competing with one another. And again, socialism, big government, whatever you want to call it, progressivism, which again is expanding the bureaucratic state, it's never worked. And so it is a challenge to get our bills through. Now, on the practical side, I've realized that it's very difficult as a Republican to hit home runs. And I'm happy with singles. And in the last 4 or 5 years in the Senate, because I was in the Assembly before that, I think I may have had more bills passed than maybe any other Republican. So that's a good thing. If I'm not number one, I'm probably at least number two. Second thing I look for is I learned these two words when I was up here: unintended consequences. In other words, some of these people pass these really bad bills, and then 2 or 3 years later, it ends up there's problems. So you have to go in and sort of clean that bill up. So that's the kind of bills we look for too, where we can clean up the bills and at the same time reduce government. And so again, I've been fortunate to get bills passed. And my last thing is I've got a good staff that watches out for those things. So it's not easy here, but we can get things done if we work hard at it. But another way to serve too is your constituents. I've had numbers of them who want help to expedite opening their business. So I've personally got involved by calling the Department of Corporations, and those agencies will listen to a senator. So we can serve our people that way. We're working with the CHP right now for people 55 and older, seniors, who if they take a 2-hour course, they can, for most insurance companies, get a break in their auto insurance. So serving our community, making our community better, there's a lot that as a Republican we can do there. Another thing too is probably the average senator hires 3 to 5 interns per year. I've been probably averaging 40 interns per year, mainly in our district office, and we get these college students, most of them political science majors, and I think we're having an impact there. My wife thinks that's perhaps one of the most important things we do, because we're teaching them the Constitution, selective writings from the Federalist Papers. We introduce them to writings by Plutarch and then a little bit on ethics by Aristotle. And I'm always amazed how many of them, being political science majors, come and say, I've never heard of these things. And they're both Dems, Republicans, liberals, conservative, and they seem to love the things they learn and then say, not only have not heard these things, but I want to learn more about this. So it's a breath of fresh air. And in that sense, I'm hoping that we're building a bench for the future for the state of California, because I believe it is California, the battleground for the soul of America. So we have to work hard to rein in government, because they handcuff individuals as well as businesses. So there's a lot you can do if you just look. Another thing too that I do is I try to go up and down the state and speak to anybody who will listen. And I learned that by reading up on Lincoln and Churchill. You have to make the case, the things you believe in. And a lot of my good friends on my side of the aisle, they don't make the case. I don't know why. I believe in our principles that I think will keep people free and prosperous. And so I just love anybody who will listen to me or who will invite me to speak in California. I'll typically go. And again, I think what we have to do is we have to make the case for limiting in government's power and reining in government's power and giving power back to the citizens, because we're supposed to rank the citizen above the state. They're supposed to become first. We have to remind our government servants that they're not our masters, but they're public servants. And so my Senate seat is a bully pulpit also, to reform government.
It seems like everyone these days has thoughts on how do you get the Republican Party back on track in California. And I know from the opportunity I had to work with you when I worked in the Assembly and certainly carried on to the Senate that the path you've taken really could be something that people can learn from as how to, survive the growing political storm in California. What are you doing in your district and in your approach that's working that maybe others can learn from? And kind of overall, what do you see as the path forward for Republicans in this state?
I think two things. Number one, I mentioned we're public servants, so we have a good staff and we take care of people when they call. Sometimes, we can't help them, but in every opportunity where we can, we take advantage of that and we let them know that we're here to serve them. And so that's been huge. Our staff's been, has done wonderful by doing that. And then I think another thing too, again, going throughout the state and in our district, showing up at events and again, making the case for limited government. And we do that with Chris, who's on my staff. He's my head of my communications department, and we're doing social media, we're writing op-eds, and we're doing a lot of things because that's what we have to do. Again, we have to make the case to be able to earn the votes to be in power. And so that's what the rest of Republicans need to do because we have the right principles. We don't always make the case. When we start making the right principles and getting out there and clearly communicating to the public, we will win elections. And again, in 1976, Jimmy Carter won by quite a bit against Gerald Ford. The Republican Party was in pretty bad shape like it is today here in California. And you had those moderate Republicans saying we have to move to the middle, and abandon our principles. Ronald Reagan came along and said we must not compromise our principles for political expediency. And he was right. He came along 4 years later and turned the country around. So Churchill did the same thing. In 1939, he was basically kicked out of Parliament for a speech. Not literally kicked out, but they wanted him to leave. And then a couple years later, he was prime minister because you have to use the microphone or megaphone that's given to you and clearly communicate the things you believe. And we have to persuade people why constitutional government will keep us free and prosperous.
So last question, and perhaps our most entertaining question, at least I find it entertaining on our podcast. So we at PRI love to enjoy a good adult beverage when discussing public policy. And so we always ask the legislators who come on our podcast to play tour guide for us. So if we find ourselves, down at the Claremont Institute with our Sally Pipes' husband, Charles Kessler, discussing public policy, where do you recommend that we go to enjoy a good glass of wine or beer or other adult beverage?
In my area, I have a couple of wineries, Thomas Winery, San Antonio Winery. About an hour away is Temecula with about 20 wineries. There's a lot of good places we can go down in that area where I'm at. And so since I'm not a big drinker, I wasn't sure where to direct you. So I came up with again, we've got many great wineries in our area. But I wanted to come out just for just a simple drink. I want to recommend In-N-Out. And the reason why, besides good food, they support good causes in the Republican Party.
Just had an In-N-Out yesterday, so I second that. Well, Senator Morrell, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us today, and keep up the good fight for liberty here at the Capitol. We need you more than ever.
Thank you, and I think you do a job that's much more important than what I do, so thank you.
Special thanks to Senator Morrell and to my colleague Tim Anaya. Also, the big event is coming up, PRI's 40th Anniversary Gala Dinner in San Francisco on March 23rd. Keynote speaker is Tucker Carlson. If you haven't already bought your tickets, you can purchase them at pacificresearch.org. And if you love to cruise, join PRI and the Claremont Institute for our joint 40th Anniversary cruise on the Mediterranean this October. The cruise starts in Barcelona and ends in Rome with a special tour of the Vatican. Guests include Andrew Roberts, author of Churchill Walking with Destiny. For more details, visit ci-pri.com. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. We hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.